Hey, what is happening, everybody? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and this week is a pretty important week. Today is Monday, November 9th, which means that tomorrow, on Tuesday, November 10th, the Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S will be launching worldwide. And then later in the week, on Thursday, November 12th, the PlayStation 5 will also be launching here in North America and in a couple of other territories, and then sometime next week, it'll also be launching in the rest of the world. Basically, this is it, man. We have made it. We have officially made it to a brand new generation of video game home consoles. This is so very exciting. I thought it would be fun for this week to kind of celebrate the launch of the next generation consoles by sort of just discussing the excitement and the coolness around the fact that it's happening, even though it's a weird console refresh, right? Everything about this feels strange, from the fact that this has been the pandemic year to the fact that Sony and Microsoft treated the entire build-up and reveal of information incredibly strangely and very mysteriously. And we were all very frustrated throughout 2020. We were dealing with the pandemic situation on one side, while on the other side, trying to be excited about this video game hobby we love and these new consoles we knew were supposed to be coming, but we continually were just denied information until finally things slowly started to trickle out. It was very strange, but at the end of the day, it's all behind us, and now we're here. It's been 7 years, if you can believe it, since the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One launched, and then 8 years since the Wii U launched the year before that, which did effectively start the 8th generation. Also, for myself, this feels kind of weirdly appropriate too, because I started Rule of Two Review with my first ever video upload on October 30th of 2013, you can see here. And in that first video, just over 7 years ago, I had my 7-year anniversary last week. And at that time, you can see the date October 30th, if you go back to 2013, that was only 3 weeks before the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One themselves were also launching. So that first video was me discussing my excitement and the coolness and the impact of the next generation at that time, where we all had Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s and Nintendo Wii's or Wii U's at that time. We were all looking forward to, okay, well, Nintendo moved to the Wii U. Now we've got the PlayStation and the Xbox doing the same thing to their next consoles, and this whole concept of the digital future. And anyway, not to be too nostalgic about it, but it was really fun for me to put my first video on the internet, my first video on YouTube, when I had 0 subscribers. I didn't know a damn thing about what I was doing, but I was just a guy excited about new consoles coming from Sony and Microsoft. I was loving my Wii U every day at the time. And here we are, like I said, 7 years later, and we're finally on to the next step. So most of you guys who know me and follow me here on YouTube and on Twitter are familiar with the fact that I myself have elected to first grab a PlayStation 5. That's the more exciting console for me right now at launch in November, mostly because Halo Infinite was delayed for the Xbox Series X. And so I've decided, you know what, I don't need to spend the extra $500 on a Series X if I don't really have a game to play. I thought about grabbing both right away, but it's like, I just don't need the Series X. I just don't need it just yet. But the PlayStation 5, it's got that Demon Souls, and I'm a sucker for all the Souls games. I love them to death. It's also coming with Spider-Man, and so I really just need those 2 games so badly that it made sense to me to just start off with the PlayStation 5. I do have my copy pre-ordered from Amazon, and I've told the story before. Super Metal Dave is the one who actually reached out to me on that date that the PlayStation 5 pre-orders started going live when we were all freaking out online. He reached out to me and DM'd me the Amazon link like the second. He was lightning speed. The second it was up, he was like, hey man, here's the link. And I went and I tried and I had to refresh a couple of times, but I got it. And then just a couple of days ago, I got the confirmation that it is supposed to be arriving on time. So I'm very excited that this Thursday, I should be getting my PlayStation 5 from my Amazon order right away as soon as it's available. Going back to the Xbox Series X thing for a minute, I do find it unfortunate that there really isn't much of a reason games-wise to buy an Xbox Series X. I mean, I know tons of you guys have Xbox Series X's, and in fact, I mean, a lot of my friends and fellow YouTubers and people who I know through my YouTube personality have already had these consoles. People have been sent Xboxes and PlayStation 5s and stuff, and I think that that's great. A lot of people already have them. The general consensus, it should be noted from people who've been hands-on with both consoles, is that they're very good. People are saying, I can easily refer to IGN's reviews of each console, and I'm pretty sure they gave both consoles an 8. As weird as I think it is to review the launch of a video game console on like a 10-point scale, I understand it, but I also think it feels weird to me. But considering that's what they did and they put this information out there, all I can say is IGN, for example, reviewed them both at an 8 out of 10. That's a pretty damn good score, even though it's for hardware and not a video game, and things are going to change as the libraries improve. So that's what it is. But they're obviously reviewing like the UI, the efficiency of how the consoles actually run, what the controllers are like. So I get it. But yeah, the Xbox Series X is an exciting console. I love the prospect of it. I enjoy having Game Pass. I like the Xbox brand, even if it's, of the three, my third favorite of the three, so it's on the bottom of a 3-person list, but I still like it. And everything I hear about how it runs apparently is very great. It is very cool. It is very quiet. It is very fast and efficient. And also, from what we understand from people who understand tech specs way better than I ever could, it is apparently a much more powerful and capable machine than even the PlayStation 5. So in terms of just raw power, it's got that advantage. For me, though, like I said, I want one, but I have no games to play on it right away. I would just be playing all my same Xbox One games and maybe some 360 games and stuff on it. And so I just don't need it right away. But because of Demon's Souls, man, I just need to play that game. It looks amazing, and in my opinion, Demon's Souls, I think a lot of people might agree, it really is the first and kind of the only game that truly looks like it's doing something next gen. Like visually, this is the next leap, okay? Playing this game in 4K, 60 frames per second on our consoles is just gonna, on our TVs, is just gonna be so cool. And I already love that franchise. Spider-Man looks fantastic too, but Spider-Man or Halo Infinite or even really Cyberpunk, like these games don't really look next gen. They don't look like, oh my god, this is the next step. They just look like the absolute best graphics we could see of anything that is current generation. But I think we should also note something that happens with every console generation, and especially myself, as somebody old enough to have lived through every significant console switch from the Atari 2600 through the NES all the way up through today. That's kind of normal, right? Especially, I should say, in the more recent console generation changes, in the digital age and in the CD-based and optical disc-based kind of age. That's where we've really seen this happen, where a new generation comes along and really at first nothing is super standing out as looking next generation, going from N64 PlayStation to that generation, PS2 GameCube. That was a big jump, but once we went from the PS2 GameCube era to the 360 PS3 stuff and the Wii, it wasn't making as big of leaps as we were used to, other than going into HD, to be fair. But even then, a lot of us, I would say most people, when the 360 and PS3 launched, most people still weren't playing on HD TVs. I know I wasn't, and some of my friends who had those consoles weren't. It took about halfway through that generation before most people were using HD TVs in their homes. And so anyway, with the launch of these consoles looming, and here we are, we're stepping into the next generation, there's a couple of things that I think is also worthy to talk about. The main thing is like the impact, right? What is this going to do? How is this going to impact the shift from one generation to another? And I think that this might be the first generation where it really takes a while to make an impact. I think because even though most of us are aware and excited about this next generation, it doesn't feel quite the same. I mean, you guys can tell me if maybe you disagree or you've seen or feel something different. But for myself, as somebody who, A, as a game nerd who follows this, and B, who is a YouTuber in this space, I really don't feel this massive and uncontrollable hype and excitement in the air like we have in generations past. It just doesn't feel the same. I don't know if part of that is because of the whole pandemic thing or not. I mean, we almost can't even separate ourselves anymore with what is something pandemic related and what is something that isn't. It's just bled into so much of our everyday thoughts and activities. And so with this Switch looming, it's like, I remind myself I'm going to have a PlayStation 5 this week, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be awesome. I can't wait. Next generation, PS5, Demon's Souls, let's go. But without having to really remind myself and focus on it, I'm kind of like, yeah, I guess, new consoles, Xbox Series X, PS5. It just kind of has that feeling like, oh yeah, that's just what's happening. As opposed to, oh my god, I can't believe it's happening, right? Which is part of what motivated me to want to make this video, is like, I think, we should be having these conversations about how exciting and crazy and important it is that these new consoles are launching. And again, you might be somebody whose entire timeline, wherever you go online, is filled with nonstop noise and excitement and glitz and glam about these new consoles. And if that's true, then that's great. I'm jealous of you. Even for myself, knowing and following other fellow huge YouTubers and people in the industry and my own friends who are all gamers, I only see very, base level statement of fact conversation about these. There's not a lot of actual tangible excitement I'm seeing, I don't know, maybe this doesn't make sense to a lot of you guys, but I can only just share what I'm feeling. I'm excited, don't get me wrong, hence the video, hence my PS5 arriving in a couple days. I'm over the moon and ready to go, but it's just not electric like it's felt in years past. And so what I think that means is as these consoles launch, and yes, with the pandemic still existing, and very few exciting titles right away, which again is actually par for the course, I think that it's going to take 6-8 months, maybe even a whole nother calendar year. We're getting into fall and Halloween, Thanksgiving 2021 time before things really feel like the next generation is cooking. And that, to me, like I said, is partly kind of normal and also partly feels weird this time. So we're just going to have to wait and see how this whole thing shakes out over the next 12 months. But another thing that I did want to mention here, and that I also think is important, is also Nintendo and how they fit into this whole thing. Obviously, of course, Rob is going to have to somehow bring this conversation back to Nintendo. But it's not just because I'm a Nintendo fanboy, as much as you guys know that I am, and they're my favorite company. I think that there is an important and relevant conversation to have around Nintendo's role in all of this new generation rolling out. I mean, whether it's the fact that we have a current Switch that released in the middle of the 8th generation, that is Nintendo's new generation. Some people could call it 9th generation, and it's there is some truth to that, but in other ways it's not true. So there's that. There's the fact that there's conversations about Nintendo giving a Nintendo Switch Pro upgrade, following suit from Sony and Microsoft, or even their own 3DS designs in the past, or the fact that some of us think that a next-generation Nintendo console might also not be too far down the road, even though the current Switch is selling like crazy and is about to cross 70 million units sold, probably going to cross 100 million units sold in the next year or two. And so how motivated does Nintendo need to feel to make a next-generation console? And just, I mean, it's all of this, right? It's all of these things about Nintendo happening at the same time we got Sony and Microsoft kicking off the next generation. And so what is Nintendo's role in all of this? If I'm being honest, I probably am going to make another separate dedicated video to this exact topic. It's the kind of thing I could really chew the fat on for 15-20 minutes by itself, you guys know. But I do want to share a couple of quick thoughts here, right? While I've got this video rolling. And I think that when it comes to Nintendo, I am personally someone who still thinks, and you guys have heard me say this, that in the next 2 years, we're probably going to see the next generation machine. It's becoming less and less likely, in my opinion, that a Nintendo Switch Pro is coming. I know that there are rumors about a new Switch SKU in early 2021, and I am curious to see if that's true. And if it's true, I'm curious to see if it's the Switch Pro people have talked about, or just an updated Switch model that improves a couple of aspects the way they did with the battery SKU version last year. To me, making slight tweaks to hardware design issues is nowhere near the same as making an upgraded Switch Pro console or piece of hardware. I don't think it's going to be this third pillar where you have your Switch Lite, your Switch Regular, and your Switch Pro. I don't think it's going to be that. I could be wrong, okay? So, hey, I'm prepared to be wrong, and I'll talk about it at that time. But my gut feeling right now, with how Nintendo fits in time-wise, they released in 2017, 2020's next-gen Sony Microsoft. At some point, Nintendo has to consider moving on, upgrading to significantly more powerful hardware, some sort of new console idea, maybe they continue the hybrid thing, and something that allows them to compete with PS5 and Xbox Series X on the third-party multi-platform title spectrum. That's such an important thing. Nintendo isn't going to want to let that go. And so, yeah, they can make it, I think, about 2 years, where the 2017 Switch and the PS5 Series X are all existing together. And even if these sales continue, at some point, the game and the software situation over here is going to probably force Nintendo to have to make a decision. And I shouldn't even say force, because honestly, I truly think they're already doing it. I think they're already tooling away at their next console. And so I think the 2022 or 23 timeline is about when we might see that stuff start to happen. So sure, we're going to have about 2 years, I think, of PS5 and Series X before Nintendo is like, hey, here we go, you guys. We're going on to the next generation for Nintendo, and let's do this thing. But another element of how Nintendo fits into this is going back to something I already mentioned, and it's the concept of if they're 9th generation or next generation or whatever they might be with the Nintendo Switch. And I think that that's a nuanced conversation. I see a lot of people who firmly plant their flag in one side or another, like it's not next generation, it's just the same as PS4, Xbox One, or it's absolutely next generation, they're the 9th gen, they started it, and it's Sony and Microsoft who are catching up to Nintendo with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Like, I've seen people, both flags on each side of this thing, okay? And to me, I just don't think it's that black and white. I think that there's a lot of nuance that we have to take into trying to determine where Nintendo fits in right now. I'm not talking about with their next gen in a couple of years. I'm talking about right now where they fit in. And to me, I kind of see a gray area in between where I think it's fair to say, like, hey, Nintendo released the Switch after their 8th generation Wii U. So if you were to follow the numbers path, sure, yeah, the Switch is Nintendo's 9th generation console. Pretty easy to understand. Numbers go in one direction, so yeah, you go from your 8th gen, you move to your 9th gen. However, what I don't think is I don't think that the Nintendo Switch, much as it is my favorite console on the market, okay, so it's not like I'm going to crap on my favorite console. I'm just telling you an objective truth that anyone with a brain should be able to understand. The Nintendo Switch is not a next generation console. It didn't move the industry or game development or graphics and power or even much innovation into a next generation. It has its own innovation. The hybrid nature is its own innovation that is incredible. But even that innovation hasn't completely changed the video game industry. Honestly, the motion control of the Wii was more of an industry-changing innovation than the hybrid stuff. And I prefer the hybrid to the motion stuff. But if we're going to be realistic and not just be stuck in our fanboy boxes, you look at it objectively and factually, that's the way I see it. Motion control changed the industry. The hybrid stuff, it didn't. It's just awesome. I mean, it's awesome for what it is. I love it to death, but it didn't change much. And again, the power and the capabilities of the machine, as impressive as they are for what it is, don't even compare to the PS4 and Xbox One, especially the Pro and the One X. And so now that we're finally moving on to next-gen PS5 and Series X, I'm sorry, the 2017 Switch, whether you call it Nintendo's 9th generation or not, it's not next-gen. It's not in the same sort of situation here as what those consoles are trying to do. And so I think it's absolutely appropriate to say that the next generation didn't start in 2017 with the Nintendo Switch. It's starting this week with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. I think that's a completely okay and acceptable statement to say. It's not a negative. In no way is it a knock on the Switch. Again, my favorite console on the market. It's not a knock on that console. It's just an objective truth. And you know what? I kind of have this belief, just my own personal theory here, that Nintendo wants it that way. I think that they like it this way because once they realized they had to move on from the Wii U earlier than expected and literally split the 8th generation in half by going from Wii U to the Nintendo Switch only a couple of years in, I think that they realized with the success that they saw with the Switch that might be their best path going forward. Maybe kind of like bisecting the releases of the Sony and Microsoft generation with their consoles might be the smartest way for them to go about it. And it's a great shining example of what I've said before about Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft, how they're all competitors, they're all playing in the same sandbox, or like I say, they're all playing the same sport in the same league, but Nintendo also manages to find a way to be the most unique of all the teams that play in this sports league. And they do find a way to still move to the beat of their own drum, I should say. And so one way that I think they might be doing that going forward is Sony and Microsoft release in tandem as direct competition. Nintendo releases in the interim periods between those console refreshes. And so they're always kind of having this whole secluded section of a generation all to themselves. They get their own level of hype, their own hype cycle, their own launches and titles and all this stuff. And I think that that could be their plan going forward. So I don't think that it's necessarily like an accident or a failing of Nintendo to not have a next generation console ready right now. I think that with the release of the Switch, this is now maybe going to be their business model going forward. And you know, next gen starts this week, and then 2 years we get the new next gen Nintendo, and then a couple years after that we move on to other Sony, Microsoft, and then a few years after that Nintendo, and there's this constant staggering, right, of like Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, like you guys get it, right? So anyway, it's kind of a long-winded sort of explanation of my theory, but that's just really kind of how I see it with Nintendo right now. And you know, I don't mind that I don't have a new Nintendo machine to get excited about right now. There's still games I'm waiting to play on my Switch, and so I instead just get to focus all my attention on my PS5 this week and just enjoy it for what it is. And so that's it for today. It is Next Generation Week. Let's get hyped and excited. I'm getting my PS5 this week. I know a lot of you are getting some Next Generation consoles this week, maybe both. And this is it, man. Let's get hyped and pumped. Even though we maybe aren't seeing as much of it online, like I said, it's still a time to be excited, and I am very pumped. So tell me what you guys think. What are your thoughts about my discussion here, your own opinions on the topic? And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. And this is Rob of Rule of Two Review. I will catch you next time on another video.